group, the best thing to do is to present a survey of Islamic history, focusing on the major bends in the flow of the struggle of the Muslim community in the last 1500 years. I mentioned that the law of civilization in Islam is enunciated in the Quran in the recited passage, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes that humankind is at a loss except such as those who have faith, who do righteous deeds, and work together to establish truth and justice, and work together with patience and constancy. So it's like a rocket ship with 5 rockets attached to it. One is faith. The second one is righteous action or good deeds. The third one is working together. The fourth one is al-haq, which means justice, and it also means truth and acquiring knowledge. And lastly, patience, struggle with patience. So when we look at the period following the passing away of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we covered the last week, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq is selected to be the Khalifa by some of the Sahaba. The ijma that was exercised, as we pointed out, was not a consensus, but it was the ijma of a majority of those who attended that session. Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq was the Khalifa for a very short time, only for about 2 years and 4 months or thereabouts. And in this brief period, he had to face some major challenges. One was the physical threat from the north. That's from the Byzantines or the Romans. The Byzantine just means the Romans who lived east of Roma. That's a name invented by the Latins. It just means the Romans. Even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Romans were probing the defenses of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Prophet himself had sent an expedition to Tabuk, which is I think it's in Jordan today, certainly in the northern portion of Saudi Arabia, under the leadership of Zayd bin Harith. Zayd was killed in the battle, but the skirmish was a draw, if you would, and the Romans learned that the Arabs were there to defend their turf. So Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq followed up on it and sent another expedition to the north, to the borders of Jordan, to secure the borders with the Roman Empire. The second challenge he faced was from some of the tribes in eastern Arabia. When they heard that the Prophet had passed away, they said, well, this is a wonderful opportunity for us not to pay the zakat. They misunderstood zakat to mean this was another form of taxation. This has happened again and again in Islamic history when people misunderstand zakat to mean another form of taxation. Zakat is not another form of taxation. It is a prescription by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the velocity of wealth to increase so that the entire community prospers. It's an obligation and a fard. It has to be given. So when these tribes refused to give zakat, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, he compelled them to do so, took a few expeditions, some of which he himself participated in. The third challenge faced by Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq was the emergence of false prophets. Religion was, and will always be a good business. people who are in religion, not the real people of religion. I'm not talking about people of the heart. Those who look upon religion as a means of making a living or getting rich, they have been there throughout the ages. So some of these tribes in Yemen and in, again, the eastern part of Arabia saw an opportunity to declare themselves as messengers of God, as prophets. And each time that happened, the community in Medina had to wage war against them to compel them to stop the shirk that they were engaged in. One of those battles was with Musaylima al-Kadhab. Al-Kadhab means the liar. Musaylima, the liar. And the campaign was a bitter one. A large number of Sahaba took part in it, and they perished in that battle, the Battle of Yamama. And amongst those who perished were many Hufaz. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ as the spoken word, the dynamic word. There is dynamism in the spoken word, the dynamism that is lacking in the written word. The spoken word is dynamic. It is beautiful. It has energy in it. And the Prophet, when he spoke those words under a great deal of stress, you know how much the Prophet ﷺ suffered. He used to cover his face. He could not tolerate the incoming of the wahi. And the Sahaba would memorize it. There were so many Hufaz, so many Sahaba who had memorized the entire Quran in the heart. And in this battle, so many of them perished. So Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu suggested to Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq to write down the Quran. And following that advice, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq had a copy of the Quran written down. It's called Sahaf Siddiqi, the pages of Siddiq, or the book of As-Siddiq. That book did not have any vowels or consonants. As you know, Arabic is a very powerful language. It's a very flexible language. It's a beautiful language. And even today, when we pronounce it, see, a person like myself from South Asia pronounces Arabic in a different way from, say, a person from Iran, who in turn will recite it in a way different from someone from Arabia and Egypt and North Africa and Africa. You see that right here amongst the gatherings. That was the case. So the first Sahaf Siddiqi did not have vowels and consonants. It was written because people who were reading it knew how to pronounce it. That was the third contribution of Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq. So he passed away. And when he passed away, he left specific instructions not to appoint his son to be the next Khalifa. These are important things that I'm going to point out. The first Khalifas, Khulafai Rashidun, or the companions of the Prophet, were very conscious of the direction from the Quran, for shura, consultation, and inherently democracy. Democracy is a new word. I don't like it, but we'll use it because we understand what democracy is in today's civilization. It was inherently democratic. He left word that his own son was not to be the Khalifa after him. He nominated Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu to be the next Khalifa. Everyone accepted it, the nomination, and they took bayah. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu was one of the giant personalities in all human history. It is not just Muslims who look upon Hazrat Umar as a great man. It is everyone. But 20, 30 years ago, there was a man who compiled a list of the 100 most influential men in history. And number one was our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Hazrat Omar's name was in there. I forget now, 60 or 64. That's their classification. It does not matter. Just to point out that it's not just the Muslims who look upon Hazrat Omar as a great towering figure. It is all of human. Why was he great? Many were the accomplishments of this great man. And what I'm going to do, especially for the young people, I hope the young people will come here with some paper and notes or something like that. Take notes, go back, study it, because there's so much to learn. So that you understand how we got here in the century at this time. Contribution number one, he was one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever seen. When he became the Khalifa, Arabia was being encroached upon both from the east and the north. From the north by the Romans, from the east by the Persians. Why? Because neither the Romans nor the Persians could tolerate a unified Arabia, which would then pose a challenge to their own hegemonistic ideas about West Asia. Remember, the Persians and the Romans were constantly at war with each other. I'm not going into the details of the warfare. You can read about it because that's not important. What is important was Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu in a two-pronged battle. If you know anything about military strategy, military matters, it is not easy to fight a war on two fronts. He fought it, and to the north, he defeated the Byzantines, or the Romans, and took over Syria. Historical Syria includes what is today Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and portions of eastern Turkey and northern Iraq. So when we say Syria, historically, Sham, that's a huge area. The Battle of Yarmouk, huge battle, successful battle. Read about it and how the Arabs were successful in outflanking the Romans, and how even the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervenes in that battle because there was a big fire, a sandstorm just at the moment of battle. The Arabs were used to sandstorms. The Romans were not. And hence it was as if somebody threw dust in your face. The outcome of great battles is always a moment of divine grace. Please remember that. If you talk to generals and army people, those who are responsible, they'll tell you. You can plan and plan all you want for a war. But the moment the first shot is fired, all bets are off. The Battle of Yarmouk, one of the greatest of battles. After the battle, the Muslims were successful in taking over Jerusalem. And here is an event which you have all heard of, but it needs to be emphasized again and again. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, he said, I'll give the key to my city only to the Khalifa. The word reaches Medina. And Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu sets out from Medina to Jerusalem. How? Not with 1,000 elephants and camels and horses, or as happens today, Cadillac cars and presidents. You know how it happens? People, look at the presidents and prime ministers today. He has but one camel and one companion, a servant, if you would, and they take turns. I used to remember the distance between Medina and Jerusalem, but it's about 500 miles or so, roughly, give or take. It so happens that when the two of them approach the outskirts of Jerusalem, the servant is on the camel, and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu is on foot. So all the Christians think that the man who is seated on the camel is the Khalifa, and they bow down to him. And the Muslims smile, and when it was discovered that the Khalifa was the one who was on foot, in his tattered clothes, Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, when there were patches on his clothes, he used to mend them with deer skin. Now the Khalifa of such a vast empire that was expanding, That's how he lived. Because they were taught by the master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Constantly ask yourself, what are the signs in here? Where were those people and where are we today? That was one of the great achievements of Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu. Secondly, he was a man of justice. There are so many events that confirm the penchant, the inclination, the attachment, the passionate dedication of this great man to justice. One of them had to do with the construction of a home of one of the Sahabi. The Sahabi hired a Persian, his name was Abu Lulu, to construct the house, and then he rented the house to the Sahabi. Abu Lulu thought that the rent was too high, so he complained to the Khalifa. The Khalifa brought the Sahabi and Abu Lulu, heard both sides, and gave the judgment that the rent of 2 dirhams was fair. Man of justice. And Abu Lulu was so distraught that the following morning he went to the masjid with a dagger hiding in his long cloak. And Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu was leading the prayer. He stabbed his stomach. That's how Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu passed away. A man of justice. A man who was a superb administrator. After he was triumphant in Persia and in the Byzantine Empire, the empire extended all the way from Amu Darya, which is Uzbekistan, the Indus River, that's in Pakistan, to Tripoli, which is in Libya. And there are more than a dozen countries today included in this vast empire. He divided this empire into provinces and appointed dedicated, honest people to administer them. He was a man who was open to inputs from other civilizations. When they captured Persia, a great amount of wealth was brought into Medina. And they did not know how to divide it up amongst the people. So one of the Sahabas who was in Persia related to the Prophet how the Persians documented it. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu had the openness of mind to say, we will use that system. And since most of the Arabs were illiterate, he hired Persians to become the scribes. Compare the openness of those early giants to the closed-mindedness that we see today. Last week we were talking about Shia Sunni. You could see the openness that they had. Persians, the conquered people. They were not Muslims, they were Zoroastrians. They had a methodology. And Hazrat Umar says, what is good is good. We'll adopt it. He adopted it. So much so that even down to our times in the Ottoman period, down to the Nizam of Hyderabad, the tradition of documentation stayed with the Muslims up until recent times. He was a great administrator. He was a man open to technology. He heard that the Persians had many technologies to offer the Arabs. One of them had to do with the construction of windmills. A new technology. The Arabs did not have windmills. Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu ordered windmills to be built in all of the major cities, including in Medina, for the grinding of corn and other grains. A great man, an open man, a man of justice, one of the greatest of conquerors, a fair man, a humble man, a dedicated man. These were the accomplishments, the achievements. Any one of them would qualify him to be one of the greatest of people who ever lived, because his empire was as large as the empire of Alexandria. And his administration was much better than that of Alexander, if you want to compare people in history. So when he was assassinated, he did not die immediately. It is related that he was bleeding. It took him about 24 hours. At the time, they did not have the techniques that we do today to stop bleeding. So it was 24 hours later that he passed away. Upon his deathbed, he nominated a committee of 6 people to select the next Khalifa, with the specific instructions again not to select his own son. Compare that with what goes on today. The dictatorships. Every Muslim country in the world, the first thing they do is to groom their son to take over. After me is my son, after him my grandson. Yeah, it's all. Compare that. Specific instructions. Now, some very important things happen. I want you to pay attention here. It will help you understand the genesis, the beginning of the Shia-Sunni split. The beginning of the Shia-Sunni split. This committee appointed Abdurrahman bin Auf as the chairman of the committee. The committee consisted of Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Uthman, Hazrat Talha, Hazrat Zubair. There was another one in there. Abdurrahman went around the marketplace and he took the pulse of the community. Pay attention. See, those days we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, the computers that the Russians could hack or whatever. No, they didn't have them. The man goes around and takes the pulse of the community, talks to people. Who do you think amongst these 6 people who's qualified to be the Khalifa? And he finds that 2 of the 6 had very broad support in the community. And the 2 were Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu and Hazrat Uthman bin Affan. These 2 were the front runners. Look at the process. So, in a large meeting in the masjid in Medina, the following question is put to the 2 finalists. And this question is probably one of the most important questions in all of human history. The question was, will you manage the affairs of the Ummah in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and the tradition of the 2 sheikhs? Will you govern in accordance with the Quran, the injunctions of the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the tradition of the 2 sheikhs, meaning the tradition of Hazrat Abu Bakr and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu? Very important question. I'll explain to you why it was so important. Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu was the first one to answer. He said, I will govern in accordance with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. And he stopped there. Then Hazrat Uthman was asked the same question, and he said, I will govern in accordance with the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, and the tradition of the 2 sheikhs, and he was elected. The tradition of the 2 sheikhs bring into play the principle of ijma and qiyas and istihsan, 3 of the 5 important principles on which the development of fiqh is based. Inshallah, we'll cover that. Very important question. Some historians question why it was necessary to add the last part of the questionnaire, namely, in accordance with the traditions of the 2 sheikhs. Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu was the door to Prophet's knowledge. He was a muwahid. His Nahjul Balagha, for instance, if you read it, one of the greatest of books in terms of advice. If you want to advise your children, read Nahjul Balagha. One of the greatest of books. He saw that some of the things that might have been done during this period might not be things that he would conform to. But Hazrat Usman accepted it And that was the opinion of the majority of those who were there, and he was accepted the Khalifa. In here also, I'll point out a few things. You see, you probably hear of the Zaydis sect. The Zaydis live in Eastern Arabia. They used to be the majority in Yemen until the convulsions of recent years. The majority in Oman. In the 18th and 19th century, Oman was a major power in the Indian Ocean, who was battling the Portuguese. They were Zaydis. The Zaydis believe in the Khilafah of Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Omar, and Hazrat Ali, but they do not believe in the Khilafah of Hazrat Usman. Giving you some ideas so you understand why this, the interplay of the various different groups as to how it happens. In any case, Hazrat Usman becomes the Khalifa. Now what happens at the time of Hazrat Usman? Several things. The momentum that was generated by Hazrat Umar, the towering personality, carries through Islamic history in the first 6 of the 12 years of the Khilafah of Hazrat Uthman. Hazrat Uthman was already 70 years old, more or less, when he becomes the Khalifa. He was a shy man. He was a man of piety who had contributed a great deal to the Islamic community. He was married one after the other to 2 of the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. A man of beautiful character, but he was a shy man. A characteristic which in an individual is an asset, but in a ruler is a liability. Now, another important thought. Wealth. The power of wealth and how it influences human beings and how it influenced Islamic history. The wealth of Iran came to Medina, and some people took advantage of it. Wealth is a corrupter. Just as civilization advances by faith and knowledge, it is destroyed by ignorance and wealth. Wealth that is abused. Since Hazrat Usman was not a strong individual like Hazrat Umar anhu, some people, especially from his own tribe of Banu Umayyah, took advantage of it. And if you read Ibn Kathir, he has given details of it as to how much wealth was accumulated by some of the well-known Sahaba. But then those who argue from the other point of view, they say it was all acquired legitimately, and therefore there was nothing wrong with it. That is true. However, what happens when wealth comes in is that people lose their pristine character, their character that brings out the best in us. Chivalry, honesty, working together. We lose that. Wealth destroys it. Look at rich people in most countries, big fat bellies, and the poor people. They help each other. Wealth was the principal reason for the onset of the civil wars. Not the Shia-Sunni split, because Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu worked with Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq, and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, he worked beautifully. All the legal questions were referred to him. He gave the rulings, and the rulings that took place at the time of Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu became the basis, certainly for the Maliki fiqh and also for the other schools of fiqh, Sunnah school of fiqh I'm talking about. It was not the Shia Sunni. It was the wealth from Persia. And this changed the character of some of the people. Corruption set in. It is related that the secretary, whose name I have documented but I don't remember here, the secretary of Hazrat Uthman had accumulated so much wealth. They give, again, details, especially Ibn Kathir. If you want to read the details, read them. And he was a troublemaker, very often scuttling communications. This was brought to the attention of the Khalifa. People came to him and said, Ya Khalifa, there is corruption in the land. But Uthman radiallahu anhu, being the shy man he was, being the pious man he was indecisive, did not take the kind of firm action that Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu would have taken. And therefore, the corruption in some of the outlying areas increased. And those who were opposed to what was going on got increasingly upset over the state of affairs. Before I go on to point out the outcome of what was going on there, I should also point out that the primary contribution of Hazrat Uthman was the writing of the Quran, including the vowels and the consonants. What had happened was, as the Arab Empire, as the Islamic Empire expanded eastwards into India, Sindh had become borders of Sindh, Khorasan in Central Asia, Turks in Central Asia, North Africans, some Africans, Egyptians. Each group would recite the Quran in his own way, and there was the risk of mispronunciation and misunderstanding. So, upon the recommendation of many of the Sahaba, Hazrat Uthman radiallahu anhu compiled 7 copies of the Quran, and where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited the Quran in different ways with different accents, he so noted it down. I had the privilege of seeing one of those copies of the Quran in the museum at Samarkand, written on deerskin. Huge papers. That was a contribution. And the Quran that you and I read is the Quran that was written at the time of Hazrat Uthman radiallahu anhu, with the consonants and the vowels, and there are differences in pronunciation, which you will come across even as some of the imams in our own masjid lead the prayers. Alhamdulillah, because the Prophet ﷺ was the most flexible of human beings. Compare the character of the Prophet, compare the character of Umar, compare the character of Abu Bakr, compare the character of Ali, with the character of the people that we meet today, who have 4 walls around them: shirk, bidah, kufr, halal, haram. Oh my God, which way are you going to go? Compare the flexibility. The Prophet ﷺ was the most flexible of human beings. Read his seerah. That was one of the contributions of Hazrat Uthman radiallahu anhu. Coming back to the issue of the dissatisfaction of people, the dissatisfaction increased, so much so that some troublemakers from the outlying areas, the chronicles say they came from Egypt, some say they came from Iraq. Well, those are all things. But a large number of people came to Hazrat Uthman with the intent of assassinating him. And some of the young men in Medina surrounded his house to protect him, and one of them, or 2 of them, were Hazrat Hassan and Hazrat Hussein. Where is the Shia Sunni stuff here? These were young men. They were standing there protecting Hazrat Uthman. However, the days were different. Whatever happened, happened. And this assassin somehow managed to get into his house, and they assassinated him. That was the trigger that got Islamic history going into fragments. Imagine some high energy material, boom, goes off, and you see the fragments. The assassination of Hazrat Uthman was the event that fragmented the Islamic community and set the community in the direction of multiple pieces all over the place. So you can now imagine the bedlam. In this bedlam, it was so bad that there were not people to bury him. They had to wait for 24 hours. And in the darkness of the night, there were only 17 people who picked up his body and went to Jannat al-Baqi, and they buried him. Bedlam. Chaos. Nobody wanted to be Khalifa anymore. Some of the senior Sahaba went to Hazrat Ali and says, "Oh Ali, we want you to be the Khalifa." Initially, Hazrat Ali refused. He saw the chaos. He said, "I don't want to be the Khalifa." But upon the insistence of the senior Sahaba, he accepted. Now there are the interplay of big ideas comes into being. On the one hand, an assassination has taken place, and his Qabila, his people, want justice. They want qisas in accordance with the Quran. They say, we want justice. On the other hand, you have bedlam, you have chaos. And Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, he is, if I were to give an analogy today, if you have some kind of an ailment, some complaint, say headache, you go to a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, but I'll talk about it anyway. The doctor had two choices. He may look at the symptoms and he will give you some medicine and symptoms go away, but the cause is still there. Or a good doctor will ask you questions. He'll say, why is this man sick, or why is this lady sick? And he will try to cure the disease. Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu was the doctor who wanted to cure the disease. Whereas the lesser people, they wanted the medicine immediately to take care of the qisas, justice, catch all of the culprits who had escaped anyway. There were multiple, a large number of them. And in the meantime, many other things happen. The interplay, the demands of justice and the demands of order and then justice, or the demands of tranquility and then justice. The tug of war between the two. And people are divided. The great Islamic community now divided. And amongst them all, the first one who takes up the sword is Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa. He belonged to Banu Umayyah. She belonged to Banu Umayyah. She felt that qisas had to take place, that the justice had to be done for the drawing of the blood of Hazrat Uthman radiallahu anhu. She collects a group of 300 people and sets out in the direction of Kufa, where lived some of the assassins of Hazrat Uthman, to mete out the justice. Now again, think of it. A state cannot have two armies at the same time. When you have two armies in a state, that state comes apart. There can be only one armed force in a state. Otherwise, the state cannot function. And here you see the beginnings of the Islamic State coming apart. None other than al-Mu'mineen, Hazrat Aisha, taking up arms to bring justice. So Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, to protect the state, has no option but to try to prevent Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa. One of the first things that Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu did was to ask the governors of the various provinces to resign so that other governors who were not corrupt, who had taqwa in their hearts, who were sincere, could be appointed. Some of the governors obeyed, but Muawia did not. The governors of Syria and Egypt did not. Why? Because of qisas. They belonged to Banu Umayyah, and they felt that until justice was done, it was premature to ask for the bay'ah for Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. So, to walk through the great interplay of events in here. The forces of Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa meet the forces of Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. Negotiations take place, and historians say that a compromise had been reached, but there were troublemakers. The Sabians, they're called. In the middle of the night, the Sabians attacked both camps, and both camps thought that they had been double-crossed and there was war. It's called the Battle of Jamal, the Battle of the Camel. A battle that rent asunder the Islamic community. The Khalifa versus al-Mu'mineen. You know this story. What happened was, as long as Hazrat Aisha was riding her camel, Hazrat Ali felt that people thought that she was leading the charge. So he ordered the camel to be brought down. That ended the battle with many thousands of casualties. And Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa and the other members of her entourage were sent back with honor to Medina. But the outcome was a disaster. In the meantime, Muawia in Syria is collecting an army because he is of the conviction that somehow Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu himself is an accomplice in the assassination. These are things that normally you don't find in history books. But if you read carefully the great classics, you'll find this. Muawiyah had the shirt, blood-stained shirt, Hazrat Uthman hung from the great mosque in Damascus. People who came to Damascus wept and took the bayah, and they wanted to take revenge. In this manner, Muawiyah collected an army of 70,000. And then he advances towards Iraq to take vengeance or demand justice, to arrest the wrongdoers. Hazrat Ali, in the meantime, who is headed in the direction of Kufa, raises an army of Iraqis, another 70,000, and the two armies meet and the fight on the banks of the river Euphrates. 3 months. Most historians say 40,000 people perished in those battles. Each side was convinced that it was on haqq. So when you talk to historians, when you talk to the ulama, it is very hard to sort things out. The best suggestion that has been made that I like is that both sides had their legal opinion based upon haqq, but the one that was held by Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu had a higher weight than the one that was held by the followers of Muawiyah. The battle goes on for 3 months until the night of Al-Harir is called, the night of battle, when the forces of Hazrat Ali attacked with this great force that the forces of Muawiyah are about to lose, when the forces of Muawiyah put copies of the Quran on their lances, raise them up, and they say, let us have negotiations based upon the Quran between the two sides. And Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, he saw through the ruse, but since there was a demand from both sides, he had to accept. So the two sides then meet. Each side appoints a person to negotiate on behalf of Hazrat Ali and Hazrat Muawiyah. The two sides meet. The one who was representing Hazrat Ali was Hazrat Abu Musa Ash'ari, a very old Sahabi. The one who was representing Muawiyah was Amr bin al-As. Here's what happened. they decide that both of them should resign and a new Khalifa should be elected. So they come out, and Abu Musa Ashari makes the announcement of the agreement that had been reached. But Amr bin al-As, he says, well, you have heard the man representing Hazrat Ali disown him. I too disown him. But Muawia is a relative by marriage of the Prophet, and he is entitled to Qisas because he is related to Hazrat Uthman. He is a capable administrator, therefore he should be the Khalifa. So you can see what is happening. And the other thing that happened at the same time was, because Hazrat Ali accepted the arbitration of men, there was a group of followers of Hazrat Ali who walked away. They were called the Kharijites. Very important group in Islamic history. Comes from the word kharaja, to walk away, those who walked away. These people are very upset with what Hazrat Ali had done, that he had accepted the arbitration of people, and they vow to assassinate all three of them, Hazrat Ali, Hazrat Muawia, and Amr bin al-As. As fate would have it, Hazrat Ali was assassinated. Muawia escaped with an injury. Amr bin al-As did not show up for the prayer that morning when the assassination was supposed to take place, so he escaped. And history now took a turn. The forces of Muawiyah declare Muawiyah to be the Khalifa now that Ali radiallahu anhu is out of the loop. And Muawiyah consolidates the territories of the Islamic Empire. He was a very capable administrator, Muawiyah. A man who understood other people and knew how to get his way without necessarily shedding blood. Hazrat Hassan, for instance, the elder son of Hazrat Ali, who now wants to follow the footsteps of Hazrat Ali, who he, along with his followers, wants to face Muawiyah. But Muawiyah negotiates with him, and through the negotiating process, Hazrat Hassan radiallahu anhu accepts a pension and retires from politics, thereby leaving the ground open for Muawiyah. And there is the beginning of the Umayyad Empire with Muawiyah. What were the contributions of Muawiyah? 1, consolidation of the empire. 2, he built a navy. 3, he expanded the empire in different directions, into Central Asia, into India, and into West Africa. But 4th, he nominated his son Yazid to become the Khalifa after him, breaking the tradition of the 4 Khalifas. That was the beginning of the sultanates, if you would, in Islamic history. It was a departure. A great deal has been written about this issue, but it must be understood. Why he did it, some historians say, is because he felt that it was no longer possible to consult with so many people. But then if you follow exactly what he did to convince all the Sahaba, there was a great deal of force, or the threat of force, that was used to bring all the people onto the platform of accepting Yazid as the heir apparent of Muawiyah. I will stop in here because a lot has been said. Much has happened in this last 30 years that I have covered, many different ideas. To recap briefly, the overcoming of the challenge from the Persian and the Roman Empire. Secondly, the compilation of Sahaf Siddiqi, and then later the compilation, the writing down, not compilation, of the Quran. The consolidation of the Islamic Empire and its administration. The introduction of technology, the introduction of madrasa, learning. The influx of the wealth from Persia, which causes dissension in the community, giving rise to the onset of the civil wars, the wealth of Persia. The assassination of Hazrat Uthman, who was not able to govern the empire, which now was a rich and powerful empire, which in turn, the assassination in turn, triggers a series of events resulting in the Battle of Camel and the Battle of Al-Harir, in which forces of the al-Mu'mineen at one time were arrayed against the forces of Ali. Forces from Syria were arrayed against the forces from Iraq, and the community falls apart. Lessons. People who tell you that all of these things happen because of the Shia-Sunni split, they're taking a position not based upon history. You have to take a deeper look into what went on, the influence of wealth, the positions taken by different people, the actions that were taken by them, the missteps that were taken, misunderstandings that were taken, the characters who lurk around like the Sabians and the Kharijites, who are always bent upon causing mischief and dividing up the community. All of these forces, all of these events must be correctly understood by the young people, by you, so that you can understand how it was that this great schism that still separates the Islamic community came about. And what were the signs in there? What was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching us through those signs? With that, I leave you. Inshallah, we'll pick it up next week as to where we are leaving off. Perhaps next week, we'll cover the onset of the Abbasid Empire and the beginning of the age of philosophy and science. With that, I conclude, and I invite comments, questions, anything you wish to say. Sir.